Thank you for joining us today for our Insurance 101 class. I'd like to start off by introducing all of the panelists. I'm Erin Nickerson with Super Restoration. We handle all of your fire, water, mold, water intrusion, biohazard issues. I'd like to now move to Raphael.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Rafael Aquino. I'm one of the co-founders at Affinity Management Services. We are a association management company. We service Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade County. Thank you for having me, guys.
Awesome. Matt Reedy.
Good morning, everybody. Matt Reedy with Plastridge Insurance. I'm one of the association specialists on the team. You don't know Plastridge, one of the longest standing privately held agencies in South Florida going back to 1919. And as a company, we represent about 1,100 condos, HOAs, and co-ops in the area. Thanks for joining.
And Steve.
Oops, sorry about that. Good morning, everybody. I'm Steve Brayton with the law firm of Rosenbaum PLLC. We're a full-service association law firm. I've had the privilege of practicing law in Florida for 26 years, and we appreciate being here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I'd first like to start off and talk about, before we get into the insurance portion of it, the categories of water damage, because I think it's important that when you do have a water issue and you're building on your personal property, that you understand what type of water you're dealing with it, so you know how it should be cleaned up properly. So our first category of water is category 1, and that's clean water. That comes from a clean water source. That could be a sink or a tub overflow. It could be a clean water line break. Some sources would be if you left the sink on and it overflowed, that type of thing. Category 2 is gray water. Gray water comes from a semi-clean source, but there could be contaminants in it. So you're gonna see that from a punctured water bed. You're gonna see that from a dishwasher overflow, or even a malfunction from your washer machine. I like to think of this water as, do I want to drink it? No. Could it make me feel uncomfortable if I did? Yes, probably, but it's not going to kill me water. Category 3 water is grossly contaminated water. This is highly gross water. So you're talking about sewage overflows. You're talking about backups from storm drains. You're looking at seawater or intercoastal water that backs up into your building. If your sump pump overflows, that's grossly contaminated water, and this water causes a potential liability for your association and your communities. Category 3 water should never be cleaned up by your in-house staff. It needs to be done by a licensed professional. And the insurance companies want to see that. They want to know that you took the liability off of the association. So how we clean the categories of water is also completely different. Category 1 and category 2, that's your clean water and your gray water. These can be cleaned and dried. I cannot dry category 3 grossly contaminated water. I could potentially create a massive secondary damage like mold growth. I could create a bacteria infestation from trying to dry category 3 water. The liability is really what we want to talk about when we're dealing with water damage situations, and taking that liability off your association and putting it onto that third party that's cleaning it up, because they're supposed to be doing it correctly. So if they misstep, it's on their insurance and not on the association's insurance. Raphael, from a management standpoint, what should the protocol and procedure look like for the management team when we have a water damage situation?
So yeah, as you mentioned, Erin, depending on what the damage is. So a lot of times, most of the damage that we've at least have experienced has either been a domestic water break or a fire sprinkler head break. Before doing anything, is you want to know as a manager. I know we have some managers on the call, as well as the board, is where your shutoffs are, and you don't want to find that out the day that you have that damage, because you're going to be running around. And the longer it takes for you to shut that off, the more damage that you're going to have. So if you have that already, that's going to give you a huge leg up on what needs to be done. Unfortunately, most of these emergencies really don't happen during operational hours. Most of the times they happen when the manager's on vacation or at 2 or 3 in the morning. Mm-hmm. So by being able to have, being able to know where the shutoffs are, it's going to give you a huge leg up. But more importantly is when something does happen is really just to stay calm. you're going to need to lead this ship and be able to address this concern. Depending on when the situation does occur. So if you're a manager and you're not on site and you have an idea of the extent of the damage because of security or someone that's on site, it's to make an immediate phone call to someone such as Super Restoration, because ultimately that's not something that should be addressed by any on-site team. You're going to want to contact them and just give them an idea so that they need to prepare and do what they need to do to be able to get on site and be able to mitigate that loss. Once you're on site as a manager, you want to basically understand where the damage is coming from. If you stopped it, what's going to need to be done to be able to repair it. Because if it is, let's say, from the fire sprinkler, you should have several sprinkler heads already on site. You're not going to be able to do that on your own. You need to call your fire vendor and be able to restore whatever shutoff you may have had. So if you have to call your fire vendor, plumber, you want to make sure that you have these vendors readily available either on your phone or depending on whatever systems that association has. From there, a lot of people want to immediately reach out to insurance. I'm sure Matt will go into the detail. Our approach to it is, look, let's mitigate the loss first. From there, we'll determine what's going on as we're looking what the damages are. So it's important to take pictures. And it's not just any picture. So when you have these flood losses that are impacting, let's say on a small scale, 5 units, you want to take pictures where your finger is in the water so you could show have a measurement to show, okay, the impact of that water. Because when the adjusters do come out, they're going to look at it with a different lens than what you experienced at that particular moment. So take a lot of videos and pictures of what's going on. We strongly urge our clients to hire a public adjuster throughout the process. Most insurance agents, they're excellent. They help you, they guide you, but that's not their expertise. Their expertise is really selling you the insurance policy and guiding you on that portion. The public adjuster is really going to provide you that support to be able to maximize your claim and make sure that, you're bringing the building back to whole. So overall, it's just kind of staying calm, knowing who your vendors are in these kinds of situations, not waiting to that moment to see, okay, who am I going to call to help me with this damage? And then more importantly, then reaching out to your partners to be able to lean on to help you with this situation.
Thank you, Rafael. I think I want to just emphasize something that you said too. It's important that you prepare for these situations. I know with my clients at Super, we take a little bit different of an approach and we'll help you build what we call a Bible for your building. Yeah. So your security person knows where those shutoffs are, because they do happen on Christmas, Thanksgiving, 4:30 on a Friday, just after you left your building. It's never Monday through Friday that we see these large losses. So it is important that your team has a plan internally for making sure the water is stopped first and foremost. If it's a clean water, if it's a gray water, we have shop vacs on site. So we can start immediately getting up that excess water until Super Restoration or whoever your restoration company is can make it to the physical building themselves. I have a building in West Palm Beach had suffered a huge sprinkler loss like you were talking about, and they were able to get up a ton of water that we got before we even got there to help them. So little things like that will save you a lot of money for the association. You have the right tools on site to begin getting that excess water up, and your team can do that. And I can partner with you and teach your team how to do that successfully too. Rafael, one other question for you. Since we are in a new normal, how are you dealing with water damages on your property in a COVID environment? What are you doing to help the residents and ensure their safety?
Sure. So fortunately enough, we haven't had a major one. We had a small one that just impacted 1 unit. But it's really the same protocols that we're following with anyone that's coming into the building. Is making sure that every individual that is coming into the building does have a mask. In certain associations, they're being a bit stricter where they're requiring to know who it is that's coming in the building and getting all the contact information. But more importantly is just making sure that they have the proper covering. In most cases, the buildings that have the larger, that are already marked so that they have the proper social distancing. But overall, it's just making sure that the individuals are covered and meeting the CDC guidelines in order to get into the building.
Okay, thank you so much. Matt, on to you. Let's talk about internal leaks first from an insurance standpoint.
Right. Yeah, I wanted to piggyback really quick on what Rafael said. It'd be really nice if these major water damage claims happened in the middle of the day when we had our full staff there, but it always seems to happen at 3 o'clock in the morning. So one of the things I try preaching to clients all the time is, right now you have the time to interview the different companies that you would have on standby. If you're calling me at 3 o'clock in the morning to ask who I recommend for water rehabilitation, it's too late at that point. We just need to get the first person to pick up the phone. So it's important to do that now when you have the time to be more proactive. But to your question, Aaron, when we're looking at it from an insurance standpoint, there's different ways water damage can affect the property. The first would be internal types of leaks and bursts within the property. And you look at leaks where in insurance, the term I'm always looking for and always emphasizing is sudden and accidental. That is the key term I'm using to identify if something is potentially covered by insurance or not. If we have a slow pinhole leak that takes 14 days for the association to find it, or the shower pan overflows and it's been going on for a while, these are often the things that insurance adjusters are going to look at as really more of a maintenance issue rather than that sudden and accidental term that we're looking for, and often going to be denied by the insurance. Now, subsequent damage could potentially be covered, but that's, I guess on a case-by-case basis from there. The immediate leaks where we have an 18-year-old water heater and it one day just finally bursts because it's old and should have been replaced 8 years earlier. Those are the types of claims that, obviously we're going to look at for the insurance and start from there. For the external types of claims that we have, there's really 3 categories that we look at. And one is construction defect. Construction defect is going to be excluded from vast majority of insurance policies, if not everywhere. And that's the reason why you see when you do have these construction defect claims against the developer that they settle for so much, is the insurance isn't going to cover it and they need that money to make the repairs to the association, prevent further water damage. We have maintenance type failures where we have an older roof, and as the roof ages, sometimes there's going to be more areas for water intrusion to get in through the system. Those are the types of ones, again, where the actual repairs to the roof will likely go uncovered as it's pointed as a maintenance issue, but subsequent damage from it could be covered by the policy. And then last but not least, the real one that we all think about is, a hurricane comes through, or a tropical storm, or maybe it's just one of those really bad thunderstorms where the wind's coming in sideways and there's either physical exterior damage to the building that allows the water intrusion to get in, or you talk about wind-driven rain, which is a coverage that's come to the forefront in the last few years, where there is no structural damage to the envelope of the building, but water intrusion is still able to occur. And a lot of times it's through the window treatments. And wind-driven rain is something where most policies, if they do have it, it's going to have a sublimit on it where it's not going to be the full building limits. And perhaps even the percentage deductible would still apply. But that's the last example I had for an exterior type of water intrusion claim.
Thanks, Matt. How, from an association standpoint, what is the proper protocol for filing an insurance claim?
Right. So let's say it's 3 o'clock in the morning, because that's when it happens and the pipe bursts. First and foremost, stop the damage as quickly as you can. You have the time to make sure that you've prevented and capped the extent of the damage to the premises. Once you have that taken care of, then I recommend you contact your insurance agent. And not every time we have water damage is something that will even reach the deductible, or may even be something that we want to file a claim for. It's often a case-by-case basis where, say we have a $5,000 deductible for water, or for all other perils, and the restoration contractor comes in and says, okay, our initial estimate's going to be $5,500 to make the repairs. Is it really worth filing that claim to get $500 out of your policy? And oftentimes we're going to say no. Again, we've had some where the association said, look, we need that $500. We don't have it to pay. And they've still filed it. And, one thing to keep in mind is that will follow you for at least the next 3 years in your loss runs, if not 5, if it's a serious reoccurring issue of water damage claim. So if you haven't had one and it's $6,000 to repair, $5,000 deductibles, you get $1,000 back if you file a claim, but you haven't had anything over the last 5 years, I'm more willing to entertain it, even though it, in a vacuum, I'm still going to say it's probably not the best idea to file that claim. But if you have 3 or 4 or 5 water damage claims a year, you just kind of get to the point where, okay, it may be beneficial to file the claim and get the money out of the policy, but you're really going to start to handicap yourself when you get to your renewal every year. And again, loss runs, every company is going to look at the first 3 years. And if you have a history of claims, that's when they expand their search to 5 years. And once those major claims have fallen off that 5-year loss run, then, carriers can't hold that against you again. But until then, it's something that you kind of got to live with. So it's worth the conversation with your agent and with what you have at that time to see if it's something worth filing. Now, Raphael mentioned getting a public adjuster involved, and it sounded like your opinion was on, every major claim. I sit on the other side of the fence of that, so I'm going to have a little bit different opinion. I start with the blanket statement of, I don't think public adjusters are always necessary, but they absolutely can help associations when needed. My typical approach is to allow the insurance company to send out their adjuster, allow the insurance company the opportunity to adjust the claim the right way. A lot of times when you have the general contractor or whoever's doing the repairs, if they have their own proposal of what needs to be done to make the association whole, and the adjuster comes out and they have their own report, you can compare the two. And if there's a $300,000 difference between the two of them, okay, maybe that's not something where we're going to be able to bridge the gap without outside help of a public adjuster. But if they're $20,000 off, a lot of times what I've done is I've called up the adjuster and I've called up the contractor and said, you two lock yourselves in a room, figure out what the differences are in your proposals, and don't come out until you've settled, until you've come to a conclusion. And it's worked. You find examples where, I'm thinking of a big fire claim that I had where, they actually were off by about $150,000, but when they sat down in the room together and went through their notes side by side, the adjuster was using a little bit of a different roofing component. They didn't have some of the permitting costs in it because they had to do a lot of code upgrades. And they were able to bridge that gap, pretty significantly to the point where a public adjuster wasn't needed. And the association was able to make the repairs with what they and their adjuster and their contractor had come to an agreement on. So again, going back to public adjusters, can be necessary for associations, but I don't always like jumping right into the deep end with a cannonball off the bat.
And as I think that also goes back to something else that Raphael said, is making sure that you're using the right contractors in your building was super. We always work with the insurance company, and if need be, we would recommend a public adjuster if we can't come to an agreement on the scope of work for repair. But just having that conversation and making sure that the contractors you're working with in your building are doing the right thing by you, and that they do this type of work. They might have relationships with the adjusters that are assigned to your case. So I think there's something to be said for vetting your vendors correctly and making sure that you're aligning yourself with the right person for your property.
Correct. And Matt brings up a good point, which was drawn very well. It's a business decision, right? Because as Matt said, if there's a $5,000 claim, it doesn't make sense to jump the gun and reach out to a public adjuster. And in the same token, you have to make sure that you're doing your research on the potential public adjuster that you're hiring as well. Just like each and every one of us, we have individuals in our field that don't have the best reputation in the market. And they taint our industry or their industry, I should say. So it's important to make sure that you have that research done as well beforehand, so that if you do have a major loss, I guess I should have identified that as well, as something over the $150,000 range, that you already have someone prepared that can handle and be capable of dealing with that. And especially in the midst of hurricane season, last thing you want to be doing is chasing a public adjuster because you need it in the middle of a hurricane season. What you're going to end up with is probably not someone that's reputable and can do the work.
Right. And when you get a hurricane, something like that just, causes damage throughout an entire region, that's when you really see the bad public adjusters crawl out of the woodwork, because they know that's when they're going to get paid. And a couple of other points I wanted to add to all of that is, when you have a good contractor, they're going to be the expert in the room when they're speaking with the carrier's adjuster. If they're a good contractor, they're going to be able to articulate of, this is what your proposal has. And going back to the example of the roofing components were different. This is what you've drawn it up with. This is why it's wrong. This is what it has to be. and the good contractor will be an advocate on your behalf. Now, jump over to, we've gone through the claims process. Our contractor says it's $1 million to make the repairs. The adjuster says, we'll give you 750. Okay.
That's a good adjuster.
Not 250?
That's more like it.
I'll give you $2.50.
Sorry, Matt. Sorry.
I'm not the adjuster. The adjuster comes out and says, this is what we'll give you. Now you bring in that public adjuster, and the public adjuster is going to get paid on what they are able to negotiate on your behalf. If the carrier's already said, we'll give you, okay, we'll say 500 when you need $1 million. You're only paying that public adjuster on the additional 500 that they're going to negotiate on your behalf. So when you hire them off the gun or off the bat, sometimes you can be throwing money away because the company would have given you, half of what you really earned anyways. And then the public adjuster helps you negotiate the difference.
Awesome. I want to talk a little bit about condominiums specifically for a second, and where the association needs to take responsibility versus where the unit owner needs to take responsibility. I know this is kind of a gray area that we all talk about the statute all the time. So Steve or Matt, whoever wants to jump in first on this one.
Well, thanks, Aaron. I'm happy to jump in on that one. So for condominium associations, the insurance statute is certainly not the most easiest thing to read, right? It's somewhat complicated and technical. But to break it down, first of all, there's two concepts we need to keep in mind. One is when we have casualty loss versus, as Matt was talking about, is it something that falls into the category of maintenance? Okay, so if we're talking about a loss caused from lack of maintenance, then we need to look at our condominium documents to figure out who's responsible for the component in question. So if it's something inside the unit, such as a water heater, the unit owner is going to be responsible for the water heater. And if the water heater breaks, that's when we get into a scenario where, in Matt's example, we had an 18-year-old water heater that should have probably been replaced 8 years ago. The owner is probably going to be considered negligent and may be liable for damages that are caused by the water heater that are not covered by the association's policy. So, but an example where nobody's at fault and it's a true casualty, unexpected, sudden and accidental, as Matt said, then the statute's going to kick in, and the association is going to be responsible for repairing the common elements. The unit owner is going to be responsible for the damage inside the unit to their personal property, which the statute details the various components that the owner is responsible for: personal property, floor coverings, wall coverings, ceiling coverings, appliances, that type of stuff. And the big question that comes up and that I get, and which goes to your business, Aaron, is who's responsible for paying for the water extraction? Okay. And that's the part where, unfortunately, the association don't like hearing the answer. And that, my colleagues and I fall into the category of the association needs to take on the cost and expense of the water extraction because they're responsible for the common elements, and the association has a duty to protect the condominium property. So we don't want to be fighting over who's going to pay for it. We just need to get it done. And the association is in the best position to retain the contractor to do the water extraction piece. We'll figure out who's going to pay for it later. So I think that's a very important point, because as one of the common themes today has been, mitigation. And it's very important that we do that mitigation as quickly as possible. Otherwise, somebody else who was also impacted by that water loss could have a claim against the association for not responding quickly enough, right? So we don't want to be in that scenario. And then the other thing that Raphael brought up, photographs. I love that. That's very. We need to have good quality photographs, because by the time it gets to me, all this is it's already happened. And then if I don't have the photographs, it's very hard for us to give good legal advice to the association as to what is their recourse in a scenario where there may have been negligence. So, photographs are a key thing. And then also something I just want to touch upon, which, because there's been, I think we can all say a big uptick in these types of claims over the last month because we had a lot of rain, up until this past week. And I saw a significant number of increase in water damage inquiries and claims in early June. And so I think inspections are important. And one of the things that we emphasize with our clients is having a protocol in place for inspecting high-risk components, such as the water heater, such as, the washer and dryer, refrigerator line, also the circuit breaker panel. A lot of older buildings have really old circuit breaker panels. And that's not on a unit owner's list of things to replace, and that can be a fire hazard. So one of the things we like to do for our clients when we do condominium document updates is build in a high-risk component provision that gives the association the right to replace these high-risk components when they need to be if the owner refuses to do so. So, it's just something to be thinking about.
Yeah, I think preventative maintenance for any one of your properties, whether you're HOA, condo, co-op, it's super important to have a preventative maintenance plan in place. And that's just quarterly. Maybe you're having your HVACs looked at, your cooling towers. Anything that you can do to prevent these things from happening is going to be the key to your success for when they do happen. Matt, another question for you. When we're talking about the repair portion of the process and getting things replaced, we know that the association has to do the drywall and make it up to paint ready. What about the individual unit owners filing their own claims? When should that take place and how do they go about doing that?
Right. So good question. When we have the pipe burst in the wall, and I'll use the example because it creates a couple different talk tracks. Two-story building, the pipe bursts in the wall on the second story, and it affects the association's drywall, it affects the unit on top, and then it runs down to the unit below it. Who files a claim? Who's responsible for what? Steve already touched on it. Then in the absence of negligence, each of those parties would be responsible for their own. If it's a pipe in the wall and nobody's failed to maintain it, things happen. It's why we have insurance. Each of those parties would be responsible for their own property. Now, I think it was 2009, the state of Florida made it requirement for all condo unit owners in Florida to purchase an HO6 policy. And that was a great idea. Everybody should have a policy, but what they created was the logistical nightmare, and that who the heck was going to track that and keep track of every single unit owner and every single association to make sure that they had the policy. So that only lasted 2 years. But some associations do still have at least the requirement in their bylaws that unit owners have it. They may not track it as actively, but at least that provision is there. So if a unit owner chooses to buy an insurance policy, and a lot of times what I find is unless there's a lender, the mortgage company forcing them to purchase it, or the association's documents, a lot of unit owners said, I don't want the expense, they get rid of it. Well, not purchasing that policy, that doesn't remove any of the responsibility from that unit owner. If you don't have a policy, all that means to me is that you are self-insured. So we have the claim. It starts on the second floor. They weren't negligent because it's just a pipe in the wall that bursts. The association could potentially be filing their own insurance claim. And then both of the unit owners who've experienced the water damage could potentially be filing the insurance claim, all depending on really what the deductibles are. Once you get the process going and all three parties have filed their claims, it to at a certain point transfers over to the adjusters and figuring out, okay, who's responsible for what. And so one of the questions I actually had for Steve or Raphael is, how successful are you in that when the association comes in and pulls out the water, how successful are you? Because obviously it would make it so much easier if we use just one contractor rather than each party hiring their own. How successful are you in getting that claim managed by one individual company, or is that something that you constantly fight?
Well, in my experience, the association is put in the position of having to hire the contractor, the extraction, and then the question becomes: are we stuck with the bill? Can we allocate it to the owners? And I think more often than not, it becomes an expense of the association, particularly when there isn't when there isn't negligence. And that's where the statute is, you know, as Aaron mentioned, is ambiguous. It's not clear. So I think the association more often than not gets stuck with that bill. And
when it's an insurance claim, the insurance company would subrogate against the unit.
right, and let that, right, if it's, yeah, exactly right. But like, as you mentioned, there's deductibles involved, and at some point the association's eating that deductible as a common expense. You know, sometimes the owners can work it out between themselves, and the association, you know, is out of it, so to speak. But more often than not, I find that nobody wants to step up. And the big, as you pointed out, the biggest problem is we have so many unit owners who are uninsured and
don't want to pay for it out of their own pockets. And,
right. So when there's no insurance, when insurance is involved, it's a lot easier. But if you have one person who's not insured, that's when the problems start happening. And so, you know, as you pointed out, we try to put in a provision that requires every owner to have insurance. And, you know, that becomes a burden on management to track. But it's better to have it than not if you can get the owners to vote for it.
Correct. And it's a shame because of the cost of an HO6 policy is so minimal. I just think people really don't know any better. I do recall, as you mentioned, Matt, when they put that legislation on where we had to be tracking that, it wasn't a logistical nightmare for us to be able to manage that. Not just because of getting the information, but more as people providing the information more than anything else.
Right.
And what was interesting was there was a product, which I don't believe it exists anymore, where it would allowing the association to purchase an HO6 as an umbrella for the entire association. So that was a product that was being mentioned. And I don't believe it ever came to fruition because eventually legislation was brought down. But we're always having to deal with that. And the biggest challenge is really having to explain to someone, even though it's clear in their documents, that the association's responsibility is the unfinished surface, right? So you get the restoration company's work is to remove that baseboard so that's how they plug their holes to be able to dry up the drywall. So, okay, well now whose responsibility is to place those baseboards back, right? Technically, it's the owners. So then it becomes a business decision for the association. Okay, do we have a ton of owners that didn't get the proper insurance, that don't, I should say, have the proper insurance? Are we going to have a ton of disgruntled owners, or are we just going to go ahead and replace the baseboards with our maintenance crew to just get this situation settled? So it becomes a challenge at the end of the day for the association. If they had insurance as an individual, then the experience is completely different. So that's an opportunity, unfortunately, through these difficult times. You know, it's the opportunity of the manager and management or those self-managed properties to educate the residents during that time. Hey, listen, I know you don't have it at this time, but look, the costs are very minimal. Contact an agent because this can happen again. We had a smaller building, I think it was about 60 units that had about a 17-unit flood, which was big for them. And they had one flood. Manager advised them to get the proper insurance. I think one person did. About 7 months later, same exact units were flooded, and only one person saw the difference. So, you know, we do our part to try to communicate that, especially during those times. But unfortunately, you know, residents sometimes just don't see the value in it until, you know, something bad happens.
I think that I really want to emphasize that point that you're bringing across right now, Rafael, is that I work in strictly condo and commercial buildings every single day. It's not a matter of if you're going to have a flood, it's when. You can't prevent the things that your residents do to your building, but what you can do is give them the tools to be successful and really take that load off of you as a manager.
Correct.
So tools that you need for education for your residents, we can provide that with you from Super Restoration on proper HO6 policies.
Thank you.
And Aaron, we've focused on condo pretty exclusively for the last 15 minutes with just a quick shout out to the HOAs that are out there and maybe even in co-ops. We're able to talk so specifically about the condos because we have the statute 718 that spells out exactly who's responsible for what. The problem you get when you have an HOA is HOAs, I guess a lot of the statute was written with true single family homes in mind, but you end up with townhome associations that are technically 720. You end up with villa type associations or anything else where there's, you know, we classify as multi-habitational, where multiple families are living in the same structure, but it's classified as 720. With 720, there is no, you know, special, this is who covers what. It's kind of goes, well, what do your documents say? and you end up at the mercy of whatever the attorney thought was a good idea when they wrote your documents, 20, 20 60 years ago. I'm of the opinion, and I think there's a lot of lobbying that would have to take place, but any building with multi-habitational building in the state of Florida, at least for consistency, would make it so much simpler to mirror what is in statute 718. For HOA clients of mine, I've been using my own association as an example. We're a townhouse community and we're 720, and our bylaws say that the association insures the roof, insures the exterior walls, but inside the unit, there are some of the extra requirements that if we were a condo would be covered by the association, but per our bylaws are on me. So I can't buy the cheap HO6 policy for a condo unit. I have to buy the expensive policy as if I were a single family home. But when I look at it, I'm presented with a situation of, do I want to be knowingly overinsured or do I want to be knowingly underinsured? I'm in insurance. I chose to be knowingly overinsured. But this is a very, very, very common issue that a lot of my HOA clients bump into. So if you're able to, and this is a heck of an adventure if you want to try to pull it off, is to try to adjust documents if you can to mirror even put in insurance will apply as it pertains to statute 718. Even something that goes that far could be able to change how the association is structured as far as insurance. Now, co-ops have a little bit of a different problem in that it's like HOA, it's what does your proprietary lease say? And I've seen co-ops where they're on either end of the spectrum or even in the middle as if you were a condominium, where co-ops, the association is responsible for just the roof and just the exterior, and the units are essentially their own single family homes inside of that. Or you go to the other extreme where the co-op is responsible for everything short of the personal belongings of that unit owner. So that's why co-ops, HOAs, every time you sit down, the first thing you have to do is read through the bylaws or read through proprietary lease of the association to get an idea of how the insurance would play out, because it's different on every single one.
Absolutely. Steve, I've got a couple questions. This is probably going to start with you. I think, so this is a COVID question that somebody typed in.
Okay.
Actually, anyone could really jump in on this one. Are any of you aware of a policy that would be available to cover associations from the COVID-19 lawsuits if someone will get sick while using the pool, gym, and try to sue the association? That's part one of the question. Let's start with that.
Yeah, so my understanding is that most insurance carriers have incorporated exclusions for losses caused by viruses or biohazards of that type. So I don't know of any. I mean, and I think Matt, we've talked about this before, and I think he's seen the same thing.
Most of the standard policies either already have the virus or communicable disease exclusion. Policies that are silent, the unofficial, because I can't make it official word, has been that they'll look at every claim that's presented on a case-by-case basis, but that the carriers really aren't looking to view this as a covered cause of loss. And for the insurance company, it was never something that was underwritten for. So if you look at the consequences, if they just made the blanket statement of, okay, we'll cover it, they pay out all these claims, now they have to build that into their rates going forward, and it just creates additional issues. But some of the carriers, if they don't have the specific exclusion in there, have gone out to say that, okay, we'll look at it case by case. Really the only policy that I guess is being pushed as a potential solution to Corona is there are two policies out there referred to as legal defense policies. And the way they market themselves is they're the policy that protects you when your general liability and your directors and officers issue declinations for coverage. And there's no deductible and there's unlimited coverage. Well, that sounds fantastic, but when you read into the policy, it's a newer product. It's not a perfect product, but I do see its value as far as Corona. If there's the association that really just wants that extra comfort when they put their head down on their pillow at night, that, okay, there's something that's out there to protect us. And what the policy does is provides defense costs only. The settlement amount is not on you. There's other types of expenses as far as a lawsuit is concerned. that would also be excluded. But the carrier is in no way tied to the actual settlement amount of that lawsuit. And that's one of the big concerns that a lot of insureds who have looked at this policy have had of, okay, they'll defend us, but for how long? And once they're done, do they really care what that settlement amount was? It's relatively inexpensive. I think the cost is about $15 a door for each community, and they'll rate up if the association has had claims over the last several years, and that goes for general liability and directors and officers. Now, a lot of associations for D&O are able to go years without claims, and you still get this frivolous one from time to time, but that gets flagged and you might get rated up for it. But then a lot of associations have also had these nasty subrogation claims where the personal lines carrier, the HO6 policy company, pays out a claim and it comes back and tries to sue the association saying we paid $18,000 for water damage and we think it's your fault because it was your pipe. And those end up sitting on our loss runs for 3 to 5 years. And those are things that can get flagged as well because it is a GL claim and the legal defense will sit over that. So,
Aaron, the big issue with these cases is going to be proving causation and proving that the person actually contracted COVID-19 due to the association's negligence. But as Matt's pointing out, you still have to deal with the lawsuit. You still have the cost of defense of the lawsuit. And if you don't have, if your insurance carrier is not appointing legal counsel to defend because it's not covered, the association is paying out of pocket hourly to defend those cases. The legal defense policy that Matt's referring to, I've looked at, and not a huge fan because there's so many things that are not covered by the policy. And like Matt said, the defense isn't tied to the outcome. So it becomes a question of how motivated the, defense provided is to, protecting the association's interests. So it's certainly a concern. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the release of liability waiver that we've talked about before? Are you preparing that for your clients? Is the association preparing that for release of liability, and how do they stand up in court?
Yeah, so when clients I have no idea how they're going to stand up in court because this is, completely new territory. What we've told our clients is simply that, it provides you an added, thing to your, an added tool to your defense. We've done it in the context of more of an assumption of the risk, that you're assuming the risk of resuming use of the common area facilities. However, I think that if the association is not complying, for example, with an emergency order that dictates how you're supposed to be operating your pool facility or your tennis court facilities or your golf facilities, whatever the case may be, that you're not going to get around complying with a county or state order through a waiver or an assumption of the risk document. There's only so much you can transfer on to the other party, and the courts look very they strictly construe releases that release somebody from their own negligence. There's very few cases that hold those documents up.
Awesome. I want to jump back, and we have a lot of questions people are asking. The first one is, in the event of a flood, which is determined to be the liability of the association, who is responsible for the replacement of the baseboard if it was original?
If the association was negligent and it was originally installed by the developer, then I think the association would be responsible for that.
Second part 2 question of that. If the condominium is responsible to restore to a paint grade finish and the owner feels the level of quality is unacceptable, what's the resolution?
Yeah, well, at some point, you get to a place where you have to agree to disagree. And if the owner, is being difficult, the association can only go so far. And at that point, they let the owner take up a lawsuit against the association. If they've hired a licensed, qualified contractor to do the work and the work has been done properly, that's all the association is required to do. And I'm sure Raphael, I saw him smile. He's had these scenarios.
Yeah, pretty much.
Management side.
never happens.
Never.
I have another one. So we have an association, a condo association that will be updating their documents soon. Can they require homeowners to carry insurance per their documents when they update?
They can, but again, you got to get the owners to vote in favor of the new document by whatever percentage is necessary to approve an amendment. So it's important, to market that provision and explain to everybody why it is so important. Because if they're not paying for the insurance on their side, they're going to be paying for it on the other side through their condominium assessments, because the association is going to have, more claims, or they're going to be taking on more of the cost of the repairs just by virtue of somebody being uninsured.
Correct. And if I can add to Steve's point, it's important to understand as an association is what's your position of monitoring that rule or that you add into the bylaws. If you don't have a team on site, so if you're a property that really doesn't have an on-site team, you have to ask yourself, okay, we can add that in there, but how are we going to manage that? How are we going to make sure that it's there? Because the last thing that you want is to add something into the documents that you're responsible for doing, and yet you're not doing, and then they can flip it, and make a different argument, and a different attorney can make a different argument on your behalf. So further, we've spoken several times about amendments. One of the things that we've been trying to do, especially now with COVID, is trying to be able to get either amendments or going through the election process we were talking earlier with Steve, is doing, online voting. Now is the time. A lot of residents have adjusted now to the technology. So they're seeing how easy it is to use. So you don't just hire a company. You obviously have to deal with your attorney throughout that process. You have to go through certain steps. However, it's something that we are suggesting to our clients, because we don't know how long this is going to last. So now's the opportunity to really make the changes that you need to make.
No, that's a great point.
Another question. If the association has a loss for which they will assess the membership, what action does the association need to take to enable the members to take advantage of the member loss assessment coverage? Do the members need to pay a deductible before their loss assessment coverage pays?
That's a good question, Steve. You want to?
No, I'm not. Are we talking about
loss assessment coverage? Is
right?
It's a mandatory as part of an HO6 for condos.
Right.
If you have the HO3 policy, which is specific for single family homes, it may or may not be in your policy. There's no statutory requirement. So what loss assessment is if the association has a covered cause of loss, and so say we have a hurricane, we have $1 million deductible before the policy kicks in, and we have to assess unit owners to get to that $1 million. If you have your HO6 policy, by law, there will be a minimum of $2,000 of loss assessment coverage in that policy to help the unit owner pay that assessment. So if the question is, what actions does the association need to take to enable the members to take advantage?
I think the association would have to levy the assessment, and then the owner would have to make the claim.
You have to levy the assessment.
Right.
It has to be the assessment, special assessment meeting, usually the meeting minutes, and then a detailed analysis of what is actually being repaired, and what exactly is being repaired and what they're being assessed for is required to be turned in. Some carriers may ask for a little bit more information, but if the association has a whole list of, okay, we're repairing 17 roofs in the association because Hurricane Irma, damaged the roofs beyond the point of repair, then a lot of times what you're able to do is just take that letter, take the meeting minutes, and then take it over to your insurance company, turn it in, and you had either the $2,000 or up to an additional limit that you bought. So again, my own association, we have the master policy for the shared roof, the walls, et cetera. I think it cost me $18 more to add an additional $1,000 of loss assessment coverage in my policy. For me, that was an absolute no-brainer. So this is a really inexpensive line for a lot of companies. Other companies may underwrite it a little bit differently, but pretty inexpensive to get additional limits on.
My guess would be is the average policy has the minimum because nobody's upselling the coverage because it is so cheap. And that's like the uninsured motorist coverage. We don't ever offer things that are
right. Unless you specifically asked for more. I'm going to
right.
assume you have what the minimum was for that company. Right. But this is my chance to say, hey, this is really something worth asking about.
Absolutely. What is considered an inexpensive HO6 policy for an individual unit owner?
broad, I guess, broad question because it depends on the association. It depends on how old it is, how far it is from the water, how big the unit is. A lot of times insurance companies are going to have minimum limits. What they'll do is they'll look at the square footage of the unit if you don't have an appraisal, and they'll apply a minimum cost per square foot to reconstruct. I'd say, I mean, for me, anything below $1,000 for an HO6 policy, I would consider inexpensive, because if you look at what it would cost to insure that unit is if it's a single family home, maybe double, maybe triple, especially in this market. So when I moved in my association, the agent quoted it as an HO6 and quoted as an HO3. And this was several years ago now. But the cost of an HO6, I think, was $1,500 for the unit. And the cost of the HO3, as if it were single family home, was $2,500. So it kind of gives you the gap. But the HO3, again, I said it earlier, was HO3, I was knowingly overinsured. HO6, I was knowingly underinsured. My association is a little unique, especially.
Yeah. I think what's really important from a condo standpoint, most of the inexpensive policies I see are somewhere between $800 and $1,200 per year. But I think more importantly, you should be insured for what you have inside of your unit. If you have $50,000 in expensive paintings or artwork, those need to be insured properly. So each unit's a little bit different in their needs, and making sure that you work with an agent who fully understands your needs analysis is really important for whatever insurance policy you do have. Again, we do want to encourage our unit owners that it's not if this is going to happen, a flood water issue in their unit, it's when. So you really need to think about having that proper insurance for them. I got another one. I think this is going to be a Steve question. Right now, they are not cleaning the restrooms as required by the CDCs at a particular property. Do they have the right to close the restrooms while owners are using the gym and the clubhouse? And how do they report that, and to who?
Well, the last part of that question is easy. You would report that to the Florida Department of Health. They're the ones that oversee that piece. Do they have a right to close the restrooms while they're operating the gym? And what was the other part of that?
And clubhouse. If the clubhouse, the gym, and the pool are open, are they allowed to close the restroom?
Well, if the pool is open, I don't think they can close the restrooms, because most of the county orders I've seen have required, and I believe the Department of Health requires there be a restroom available if you're operating the pool. If they're not operating the pool, then I think the restrooms can be closed, and Department of Health would be the agency to file the complaint with. How quickly they're going to respond is anybody's guess, but they may come out there pretty quickly and shut down the pool.
Can the board be reported to the CDC if they're not following the guidelines to decide to have a board meeting with more or less than 15 to 18 people in attendance?
I don't think the CDC would be an enforcement agency for something like that. That again would probably be at the state level. If we're dealing with a condominium association, maybe the complaint would be with the Department of Business and Professional Regulation,
The health department.
and also the health department. Again, would be your best source to file a complaint with.
Okay. And so this one probably is a Steve question, maybe Raphael. Who is liable for external damage, possibly foundation, from a broken sprinkler for a property within an HOA when management does not have the matter addressed in a timely manner after being made aware of the situation? Is it the HOA or the management company?
Well, it could be both. The management company has a professional license and has a duty to exercise reasonable care and skill when dealing with issues that fall within their scope of responsibility under their contract. So it would be a question of, is that something the management company has undertaken pursuant to the terms of their contract? The association would have liability as well, because if their agent is negligent, they're responsible for their agent's conduct. And if the board has actual knowledge of the problem because it's been reported, then they have independent liability for not acting in a timely fashion. So that's a very fact-specific question.
I think something that I would, kudos to your team, Raphael, I'm about to shout them out. I was actually at Raphael, one of his buildings the other day, and I think that Their policy for incidents is really spectacular, where they are required by the team to fill out an incident report for any leak, flood, complaint. So it's all documented and on record. I think in this situation, that is something that is very crucial to determine those liabilities.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's just part of our practice. Just because at the end of the day, it's our responsibility, right, to put the board on notice. Last thing we want, ultimately, our goal is to protect the entire association and every resident inside of it. And the only way we can do that is making sure that we're giving them the information so that they can make an informed decision on the direction that they want to take. Ultimately, we are just really the information providers. The decision makers are the board of directors, not us.
Awesome. I think that's great. We have another question. HOA had a lot of tree damage and trees down from the last week's storm. The first thought, it was only one tree. Insurance agent said we should pay ourselves because we have a $5,000 deductible and it doesn't make sense to put in a claim and it will raise our rates. Now it appears, after more closely examining the development and some questionable damage, the costs may be in excess of $25,000. Should we put in a claim at that cost? We don't have a large reserve, unfortunately.
Well, go ahead, man.
If this is just tree damage, which is the way
It's not covered.
Oh yeah, vast majority of policies are not going to cover any trees, bushes, anything like that. There are some policies that'll have a little bit of a supplemental coverage, but that only kicks in when you've hit the deductible for a true hurricane. Like one of the policies I'm thinking of, I think they kick in $10,000 for trees, bushes, shrubs with a $1,000 limit per item. But again, that company only kicks it in if it's been a hurricane and you hit that percentage deductible. So it's hopefully we never have that serious of a claim, but it's kind of a throw in once you've paid $1 million for it.
So on just a normal South Florida Tuesday afternoon storm, it's not a coverable loss?
Yeah, and unfortunately, just trees, bushes, shrubs aren't covered.
I mean, if the tree falls down and damages the structure, the structure could be covered, but not the tree.
Not the tree itself.
Yeah, the tree wouldn't be covered. It'd be the damage from the tree falling on the structure.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much. There's one last topic I'd like to discuss. Actually, there's two, and that's emergency powers in a post-storm situation. I'm going to leave it Raphael and Steve on this one. What are emergency powers, first of all? What can the board do with them? And from a mitigation standpoint, let's say they suffer a loss after a storm, what are they responsible to do?
So I'll let Steve jump in first on the legal side.
Okay. Thanks, Raphael. So under the emergency power statute, which both condominiums and homeowner associations have, 718, 1265, and I think in 720 it's, I want to say 316. And those statutes look pretty much the same. The association has the ability to take steps necessary to do what they need to do to mitigate the loss. So they can, for a condominium, they can close down an area of the property that's been determined not to be safe by the association's professionals, whether it's engineer, building superintendent, whoever it is says, this area is not safe, they can shut it off. An owner can't say, well, I have a right of access to the condominium property. Not when it's not safe. The other thing that they can do is, immediately hire contractors to repair damaged property, whether it's the common elements or the unit itself that's been damaged, in order to mitigate the loss. As we've talked about all through today, mitigation is the key to every type of loss. So that's another thing that they can do. The statute also authorizes, I want to make sure I get it exactly right. They can take action and remove debris and prevent and mitigate the spread of fungus. One of the biggest problems, when it's something we haven't talked about today, in response to a major water loss, is mold and mildew, right? So that's why mitigation is so critical, because we don't want the condominium property to be contaminated with mold and mildew. They can contract on behalf of any unit owner or owners for items of service which the owners would typically be responsible under emergency powers. And also, perhaps most importantly, is the association has a right to levy special assessments if they don't have adequate funding, even if their documents require a vote of the owners ordinarily for special assessment. So that's critical. And then the other thing is if they're in a situation where they have to borrow money in order to pay for the cleanup costs, they're authorized to do that as well. Borrowing money is something that probably after a loss has occurred, especially a hurricane, that it's probably too late. Those are the kind of things you need to do from a planning stage rather than after the fact. If you're in a reactive mode with funding, you're going to have problems mitigating. So that's really important to set up on the front end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what I'd like to touch up on the emergency powers, the boards obviously at the moment no longer have the emergency powers. So, we're kind of caught in the middle sometimes where, you have situations where they get abused. Right now, I guess my overall opinion with not having the emergency powers at the moment, we feel overall comfortable just because there's a bit more transparency. Whatever actions are being taken, they're going to be followed by what statute need to follow. We saw the need for the emergency powers, more importantly, especially when COVID initially hit, because no one knew the impacts that it was going to have on associations and the impacts that it continues to have. I'm of the belief that I think overall our industry will be impacted, probably not for another 6 to maybe 12, I would say more 12 to 18 months from now. Why? Because, right now, I think it was close to about 10% of individuals in FHA whatnot are within the forbearance program. And right now they got 6 months. So probably most individuals that are within that program are probably decided, I'm going to pay my maintenance fees. This is small, but I'm not going to pay my mortgage. And if that does get extended to 12 months, we're probably going to have a flood of units on the market. And that's where the market most likely will turn, and I believe it's going to impact our industry as a whole, where we'll really start to see potential delinquencies impacting our associations. I think right now we're kind of in, it's in limbo. We really don't know. At least an assessment of our associations, we've only seen about a 1 to maybe 1.5% spike in delinquencies. We've seen a couple requests for payment plan, but nothing that's an immediate shock. However, I'm telling my clients to look, we need to stand tight. We need to prepare because, I don't believe that we're going to see the true impacts, at least if I'm speaking more financial, for another 12 to 18 months. So it's not the coast is clear for us. I don't believe. I think right now we just need to prepare and be ready. So should that time come, that we're prepared. So, collection policies followed through. We're way past that point of okay, we're going to waive late fees for a month or two. I think at this point, it's business as usual.
Thank you. So I think it's safe to answer the question, has the governor extended the EO period for longer? That's a no.
As a no, you are receiving, at least I'm seeing several attorneys requesting it. And I get it 100%. I'm not against that whatsoever. Because there are major benefits, especially for associations as a whole. But, as a board, you could still host your board meetings. Correct me if I'm wrong, Steve. You could still host your board meetings online as long as you're following the protocol. Where it becomes a bit complicated is with the annual meetings. But outside of that, I get why they're requesting. And if it happens, hey, we have a tool that we get to use. But at the moment, right now, the boards don't have any emergency powers. The DBPR, I think it was June 6th or June 7th. June 1. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what Raphael's, is talking about is the ability to have a meeting of the board without noticing it and having a closed meeting because we're in a state of emergency. And so, the statutes that we're talking about were drafted with the idea that these emergency powers would kick in after a natural disaster, such as a hurricane, not because of a virus such as COVID-19. So the Department of Business and Professional Regulations suspended a portion of the statute that required that the event caused damage, with the idea being that the damage we're talking about is property damage, as opposed to, loss of human life as a result of a virus like we have. So, to Raphael's point, associations have had the opportunity now to adjust, bring on alternative platforms to conduct meetings such as Zoom or whatever platform we're using today. And so the need for that aspect of the statute may not exist today, but having the ability to restrict guest access to the property, having the ability to do things that in normal times you don't have to do, there's still a need for that. And so I agree 100% with Raphael. And, we are still under a state of emergency unless the governor extends it past July 7th. And I think he's going to have to, given what we're seeing right now. So I think that, the associations still have a duty to protect the safety, health, and welfare of the community. And if something is happening in their particular community where they need to reverse course, I think they're going to need to. It's a tough spot to be in right now.
Correct. Yeah, and our experience overall is if you're always going to get, the few that are going to complain, but most people are, I think we're all inundated with news nowadays, right? Wherever you turn, they're telling us, the numbers are growing. We're becoming the next epicenter for COVID. Fortunately enough, at least, I've been monitoring the numbers. The numbers are definitely spiking. They've come down the past 2 days. Any death is horrible, but at least it's kind of maintained in comparison to New York. I've kind of been looking at the two just to see, okay, where are we headed, right? To try to prepare, at least advise our clients in the best fashion that we can with the research that we do. But as Steven said, if you need to take a step back and say, hey, we've had several associations that just decided to close gyms and are already considering closing pools again, just because the numbers are starting to spike. You're seeing it with just at least in our general friends, you were seeing already more people, hey, this person got COVID, this person got COVID. So taking a step back and doing what's best for the community is your role as a leader, as a board member. And you shouldn't feel bad that you need to do that, especially we understand it's summertime and kids, everyone wants to use the pool. But at the end of the day, we need to look out for the well-being of not just yourself, but also your residents.
I'd rather be on the side of the case where we were overly cautious than
Correct.
Not so.
Correct. Correct.
We have another liability question. So this particular property has leaves from overhanging branches that fall on the building's stairways and walkways. There's an elderly unit owner that has complained she's afraid of falling on the wet leaves when it rains. The board does not want to spend the money to remediate the problem. If the owner slips and falls and is injured as a result of wet leaves, will the association still be covered by their liability policy?
Short answer is I would still expect the general liability policy to cover that claim. And Steve may want to emphasize this as well, but my next concern would be what other lawsuits could she file knowing that this is a potential hazard and the board is unwilling to remediate it, especially if she has that claim. It could be general liability with directors and officers on top of that for failing to keep it.
It'd be she'd have a potential cause of action for breach of fiduciary duty against the association, which would trigger a claim on the directors and officers policy. And breach of the governing documents for failing to maintain the common property, whether we're talking about a condominium or homeowners association. And then that would typically trigger a right to attorney's fees if they prevail, which could be as much as the underlying, claim, for personal injury. So yeah, there's a double whammy there.
So important to get the education to that board and let them know that they could have a big problem on their hands.
Yeah, it's the penny wise and pound foolish syndrome.
Yep. Sometimes it's easier just to fix the problem than to take it to the legal side. We have a couple more comments from our person that's having the tree issue on the call. As in regards that he or she said that their agents that they're covered for a 5K deductible, not replacement of tree, but cleanup and removing. And one of their trees is like 2,200, it appears to be.
If it's 22,000 for just one tree and the agents indicated that it is covered subject to the $5,000 deductible, I think that would probably be well worth filing the claim. You're not going to see, now of course, I'd have to look at the policy, but I doubt you'd see a significant increase because of that one claim unless there's other issues ongoing. It's one of those things where every association is a little bit different with their loss history. size of the premium, what are the other exposures on the premises. But just looking on the surface level, $5,000 deductible and over $25,000 you might be able to, or for the cost of this, I think 20 grand would be worth it.
And I'm gonna just type in Matt Reedy's phone number here so you can call him directly after this call. And maybe you guys can have a conversation about that policy and what's in it. Does anybody else have any other questions, or does my panel have any other questions that they want to address regarding water damage claims, how to file a claim, resources for our managers?
I think the overall message is just being proactive, you know, and you know, proactive mitigation and prevention.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Preventative maintenance on the management team and having a plan. If you plan for your biggest risk for your building, and I always encourage my managers to think outside the box, maybe your roof is old and that's your biggest risk on the property. Maybe you're an intercoastal property that's flooded in the past. Plan for that risk, and then everything else that's smaller that happens, it's going to be an easy process for you to get through.
Correct.
Yeah, don't wait till the pipe bursts in the wall at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Not at all. It will not be fun.
One last question that somebody just typed in. If a COVID suit if somebody gets a COVID lawsuit, can the association get attorney fees?
Most likely not, because it would be a negligence claim and not it depends on how the claim is brought, whether or not the association would be able to get their attorney's fees. If it's brought as a breach of the governing documents, then yes. If it's brought as a simple negligence case, then no.
Another question we just got in. A neighboring community does not do a hurricane tree trimming. They have large trees that also hang over into this community. What can that community do to get them to comply?
Right. I have the same problem at my community. We have this huge tree on the neighboring property that if it falls down, it'll take out our pool house facility. Not a whole lot. What I would recommend you do is you put that neighboring community on notice, send them a letter, demand that they cut down the tree or trees or trim or whatever the scenario is, so that you've put them on notice, so that if there is a loss and they fail to act, that would certainly strengthen your case, you know, in a post event, you know, hurricane event where you've had damage as a result of the neighboring property. And when you go to sue them for that damage, you've got the letter. So I think you send it to them certified mail return receipt requested, demand that it be cut down, removed, whatever the scenario is. But I know when you call code enforcement, if the tree is alive and it's not a dead tree, they're not going to require the neighboring property to do anything.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate.
Can the association that the tree is hanging over trim the tree?
If it's hanging over the property line, then absolutely. The portion that's hanging over can be trimmed, yes. The big problem I run into is the communities don't want to incur the expense of having to trim what they perceive to be somebody else's building. So you got to make the business decision of whether we bite the bullet and deal with it, or, you know, hope for the best.
Awesome. And if we don't have any other questions, does anyone else have any other questions that's on the webinar that they'd like to type into the chat? I don't think we've answered everything. Well, I'm going to end this call then, and thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to all of my panelists. You guys are awesome in answering all these questions. Thank you to everybody that's here today. We do have this recording we will send out along with the outline for the meeting as well that we went through. And
Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And we'll
Thank
talk
you,
to
Aaron.
guys
Thank you,
soon.
Matt. Thank you, Stephen.
Have a great day, guys.
Have a great one.